Hey, pushers, Mr. Imatsu here, coming with your period six activity, the last one for the politics and economics of the Gilded Age. So by now, we've really been focusing on the rise of big business, the labor unions, the rise of cities, industrialization, and the problems that come with them, and also the corruptive nature of government at this time. Um, so this is, I guess, kind of reinforcement of that, kind of summing this all up, getting us as close as we can to 1898, since this period goes all the way back almost to the end of the Civil War and almost Reconstruction. So get into it. One thing it's going to talk about is going to talk about laissez-faire capitalism, and some of you guys may be familiar with that word, but it's a French word done by the French physiocrats, done actually in the Enlightenment, which means hands off, right? Let it just go. And we interpret that type of idea today as what we call capitalism, what we call a free market system. Now, theoretically, our country is capitalist, but at certain levels, not. For example, currently in this current situation, there's been obviously a lot of businesses that have been really, really gone through some problems with this. Really about the leisure and travel industry, which San Diego gets a large part of it, right? The hotels, the airlines, the cruises, right? And San Diego being a port seat, super important for us. So when this has happened, we've given them some loans. Some of them are kind of free loans. Some of them have strings attached. So all these different loans came out, and they're coming from the government and not coming from individual banks. And it's actually, well, they're going to banks, but it's actually being financed through the government. In a truly capitalist system, that wouldn't happen. These companies would have gone bankrupt and would have waited, and then until then, we got bankrupt, we lost all these jobs, and waited until this gets over, and then hopefully those businesses would come back up on their own accord. But in a truly free capitalist system, that does not happen. That type of support from the government would not happen. So a lot of us talk about how we're capitalists, and we are, but we're just not a free market system as it is. We have a lot of government intervention, whether it be at the federal level from the president and the Congress through acts that they sign and pass, or it be through our Treasury Department, well, not a Treasury, but our Federal Reserve. And so it's kind of going to college economics that we're not going to. So the laissez-faire at this time, hands off. You're going to read this about these liberals, these liberals, and it's not the same type of liberals that we have today, but these liberals are going to advocate for a laissez-faire view of the economy, which means please don't do anything. I kind of think it's like laissez-faire, hands off in some situations, but in a lot of situations was hands on, because as you know, and as you've read, the big business has a very corruptive influence on politics right now. And so some of these laws are being created, whether it be breaking up strikes or the way in which railroads are getting land, the government is supporting large and big business. And we saw that during the reign of Abraham Lincoln, sorry, not reign, but during his presidency, right? He was not a king at all. So just as a heads up, like the idea of the liberals is like, hey, let this free market thing go. Let supply and demand do its thing. If people go out of business because they don't demand with a product, like in this current situation, then let them go out of business. There's a lot of economic pain in there. Obviously, if all these people lose their jobs, then we get more people that can't pay their rent, can't pay their mortgage. They're getting kicked out. Other businesses being closing because they don't have the extra money to buy whatever those leisure items are, whether it be at Best Buy or Target or Walmart or experiences like vacations. And so they start stopping what they're buying, and then more businesses. So it kind of becomes this downward trend. And this is why government today and in the past actually does get involved, and actually has laws to get involved in these kind of situations. So it's kind of an interesting read by these liberals, because they're saying hands off, as in, hey, don't regulate us, as in don't tell us what to do, government, and don't tax us, especially don't take our money. But can we make sure that we get a lot of free, cheap land for the railroad, or can we be able to get these types of tax breaks so that we don't have to pay so many taxes, even though there are taxes being paid? So a lot of these situations are happening at that time. So you'll get into that about liberals and laissez-faire capitalism. And in my opinion, it was kind of not a hands-off approach. It was a hands-on approach for government in support of business. Okay. You're going to get also into just the Democratic and Republican parties, and they're starting to shape up a little bit more to something that we're familiar with. And obviously, we're getting closer and closer to modern history, so they're going to start sounding a little bit similar, but not really. I just pulled up the election of 1896, which elects McKinley as a Republican. I'm just going to talk about some of their views. Once again, we know that the Republicans were from the former North. They definitely have a kind of civil rights view, but a lot of that's kind of gone off to the wayside by now, as you saw with the Reconstruction. Really, it's about right now, it's about being pro business and pro growth and pro industry. And again, a lot of the reason why they have the votes in here and the reason they have votes in here is through the corruption nature of politics. Both Democrats and Republicans were kind of working with business in order to get these votes. One thing that we can say about the Democrats at this time is that the Democrats are, remember, the party of the Confederacy. So they're largely in the South. They're largely, having kind of a, a racial view of segregation still, and as Khan Academy says, blatant racism. So that's something that you can understand from the Democratic Party at this time. Things will begin to shift a little bit more, where the Democrats are kind of being known for the worker. We're not there yet, though, but this third party is going to show up called the Populist Party. And the Populist Party is going to be saying both of you guys are too big business, and we're for the farmers who are getting just punished by the railroads at this time. And we're also for the industrial workers, for the unions, for a working wage, and to bust trust up. So this third party is going to show up, and it's going to get folded into the Democrats. And the Democrats are going to have a little bit of an issue because they kind of have this kind of not big business view, but also this kind of pro racist, view. That's all I'm gonna say, pro racist view down in the South, and trying to mesh those two things when a lot of African Americans have a poverty and they also have the right to vote is kind of hard. And we're going to talk about those issues. So the Democrats today are kind of known for working for poor minorities and for the lower class, right? And so you're starting to see a little bit of that when the populists kind of get sucked up by the Democrats. Okay. But those are the two parties that we have today. I mean, today, this looks actually almost completely reversed. Today, all of this are almost Democrats over here, and then all the South and Midwest is largely Republicans. So just to give you an idea about how switched things have happened, because things have changed over time. But we'll continue to understand the development of these two parties. One thing you're going to learn about with these politics is not only the corruption influence, but there's actually this thing called political machines. We don't have secret votes at this time. And a lot of this, because of the spoil system, Andrew Jackson, if your party wins, you get access to not only national jobs and Congress and otherwise, but also remember that there's state and local jobs as mayors, as all these different jobs that we have at the government level, and you're getting a government salary with government benefits and government retirement, right? I mean, that's a great benefit that I have as a teacher, is some of the benefits that I receive by working as a teacher for the government in a public setting. So this just kind of shows something, I want to analyze a couple things. We have it looks like a policeman right here that's A-okay with basically they're coming in and just taking things, and it looks like they're getting bought off or being bribed. I don't know what is going on in these pockets, but they all have pretty deep pockets that they're stuffing things in. Looks like another guy is keeping these guys in line. We got a bunch of, definitely looks like richer dudes with their, the way these guys are posing, definitely look like richer guys. And these guys are just pleased as these guys are coming in. So the way machine politics worked, or political machines worked, is they're kind of an organization that just did everything they could to make sure that their team got voted in, both Democrat and Republican. So Democrats have political machines, Republicans have political machines, and they do this a number of ways. One way is they go to immigrants and they would say, hey, I'm going to go ahead and help you with learning English. I'll help you enroll your kids into school. We'll help you find a place. We'll even help you get a job. But when I give you all these things, remember, you have to vote for me, whether it be Republican or Democrat. And at this time, a lot of the polls were not closed. We didn't have what we call secret ballots. So people knew going in what you voted for. And so could you imagine that somebody's staring over you and go, hey, remember who gave you, food in your mouth, a roof over your head, helped your kids go to school, and now you're speaking English and have a job at a factory. Remember, I did that. Vote Republican, and they're watching you. Make sure you vote Republican. Political machines also engaged in all types of different forms of corruption. Forms of actually voter fraud, where we have one person like voting 3 different times. It's a funny story on Crash Course U.S. History where a guy comes in and he like shaves his like mustache, then he shaves his beard, then he cuts his hair, and he votes like 4 times at this time, and everybody knows, but he just keeps on doing it because he's part of the process. So, political machines also, they wasted a lot of taxpayer money. If you ever want to research for this one on Tammany Hall, there's a pretty cool, again, Crash Course U.S. History video that talks about this guy got paid almost in today, what would be today's standards, like close to $500,000 to do this plaster job, but it wasn't that good. So to do the repairs, he got like another $2 million. He got paid like 4 times what the original job cost. Something like chairs and desks cost over like $200,000 of those back in those times. So just a waste of money in these different things. So Boss Tweed and Tammany Hall is probably one of the most famous examples of this, what we call political machines. And their job, using intimidation, using buying off the police, manipulating immigrants and other poor individuals that are coming to the cities for work to get to vote either Republican or Democrat and get their team in. And we see that still today in modern elections, right? You have teams of people that are working for one party or the other, knocking at the door, calling people up, mailing things out, trying to make sure that people come out and vote for their party. So here it says political machines controlled all parties in the city. There's these things called bosses and captains, and they thought that made sure their candidates were elected and make sure that government worked to the advantage. And here it is, the ballot, and he's just watching you, right, as you put your ballot in. Lastly, one of the parties that you're coming into is the People's Party. I kind of talked about that, and here is an example of the People's Party. So you can see that it's a very rural area, a lot of farming. And remember that this is an outgrowth of the Farmers Alliance that we talked about earlier. The platform that they calls for a graduated income tax. That means people who make more money have to pay higher taxes, which is what we have today. The direct election of senators, back in that time, your state legislator would vote in the senators in a lot of cases. So remember that we do have a Congress full of the House of Representatives and the Senate, as you guys know, the big Capitol building. But here in California, we also have a state Senate and a state legislature. Actually, a state, I think it's not a state assembly, I think, which is like their lower court, right? You have the kind of like two, just like we have it in Washington D.C. for the federal level, we have at the state level where we have 2 houses. But anyways, those are the individuals that would actually choose the senators. Now, as it is today, for instance, Kamala Harris was a former senator who's now running for as vice president for Joe Biden. This is going to probably date this video, but anyways, now the senators are directly chosen by the people, by our votes here in California. So that's what they're calling for. A shorter work week. So there again is like that kind of shift with not only a rural focus, but also going back to the cities. So you can see that this is an economic issue. This is a political issue, and an economic issue definitely for unions. A kind of interesting part about the populace, you think about them being the poor, and you kind of think of like minorities and immigrants, but they definitely want to restrict immigration. And once again, that consistent story of the poor are concerned that immigrants, no matter where they're coming in, may take jobs or may take opportunities from them, right? So restriction of that, and more importantly, was a public ownership of railroads. Railroads at this time were charging poor farmers much higher prices than some of the businesses, and causing farmers who were already losing a lot of money due to lowering prices because the supply was so high. There was so much technology creating so much wheat that there was an overabundance of it, and the prices started dropping. So they started losing money on prices dropping. But in addition to that, they started being gouged or being taken advantage by railroad companies, which charge them really high rates compared to other companies. So you can see that the Populist Party is kind of merging this farmer, city, labor issue into like one party. And, later the Democrats and the progressives are going to be unified, and they're going to really implement a lot of the changes that we see today. California goes through in the 1900s a progressive governor, and we actually kind of set the foundation for the rest of the country to follow us in some of the progressive things that we do. One of them that you guys have is what we call the initiative, the referendum, and the recall. Basically, this you can remove a governor or any elected official out of office. You guys can actually write laws and pass them. This is why outside of like stores, you have people coming up to you and saying, "You want to sign this?" Especially your parents if they're registered voters, right? And it has like flags. Don't say registered voter. Usually outside the grocery store, and getting you guys to sign things. They get a number of signatures. It goes on to the ballot, and if it's passed by us, it becomes a law, right? We didn't even need to go through the state legislator at all. So a lot of these reforms are going to be taken by the progressives and the Democrats as we move forward. Okay. So that's activities, period 6, just as a recall about period 6, this last video, just kind of summarize all together. Remember, it starts with the West and how we expanded further over and some of the issues, especially the farmer issues. And one that I just talked about, how they're losing money and how they're being charged by railroads, which really develops them into what we call the Farmers Alliance and the Ocala platform. And then we talked about the New South, going back to how Reconstruction has now officially ended, but racial segregation continues there, and kind of the failure of, I would call at least the 15th Amendment and the goals of the Civil War, I would say, is to try to create more of an opportunity of equality for African Americans. We did not get to that point. And then after that, we really focused, that's kind of like half of period 6, we really focused back in about businesses and talked about the growth of these things called trust, and talked about a few, Carnegie, Morgan, and Rockefeller, right? And how they used tactics, and how other businesses would use those same tactics, and how laborers, the poor, workers, the working poor began to try to unionize, and how that largely failed during this time and will continue to fail until the progressives come. The progressives come and they're going to start busting up trust, and they're going to start actually supporting some of the union goals that we're doing. So we'll see that in period 7. And then some of the also social undercurrents are happening, whether it be economics that's justifying this, social Darwinism that's justifying this, and some of the immigration factors that are coming in that are causing people to start wanting to limit immigration. That's going to actually increase the nativism that's going to be happening in the 1900s, and the resurgence of the KKK actually in the 1920s. It actually goes down but gets resurged during that time. So that nativist movement is going to be happening. We can see that from the immigration as people come to the United States, to these new thriving cities of opportunities and factory work. All right, guys. So that's period 6. We'll see you in period 7. Take care. Bye, pushers.